Welcome back, my friends. Or should I say, welcome to the shadows. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you're safe. I hope you're well. Because once we begin, safety is never guaranteed. I only wish one thing for you, that your nights stay long, your health stays strong, and that you never find yourself relying on someone or something you can't trust. For those who are struggling, may your burdens be lifted. For those battling sickness, may peace find you. And for the souls who are no longer with us, may the darkness treat them kindly. And just as you remember me and my family here in your thoughts, remember too that your support keeps this channel alive. Your likes truly help me. They show your appreciation, and they motivate me to keep working harder to bring you even darker, scarier stories. Your subscription is more than just a click. It's your welcome into the Spooky Stories family. Now, before we dive in, a warning. These stories are not for the faint of heart. When we speak of things that dwell beyond, they say those entities draw closer, listening, watching, hungry. If you're easily frightened, you might want to keep something near to guard you. But if you're brave enough, let's step into tonight's nightmare together. Our first story.
My name's Adam, and I've been working as a motorcycle delivery rider for about 4 years now. I usually run 12-hour shifts, from 1 in the afternoon until midnight, but most nights I push it longer, sometimes 14, sometimes 15 hours, getting back home around 3 or 4 in the morning. One night, I got a delivery order about 6 miles out, in a wealthy suburban neighborhood filled with big houses behind tall hedges. Outsiders like me rarely linger there. I dropped the food off at the address and was standing outside, exhausted. Across the road was a wide, empty field, dotted with rundown shacks, half collapsed and abandoned. I had parked my bike along the edge of that field. I remember thinking I needed a quick break. So I grabbed my water bottle, took a long drink, and then called a buddy of mine to kill a little time. I must have talked to him for 10, maybe 15 minutes. Everything seemed fine. Now, here's something you should know. My bike's indicators don't light up unless the key's in the ignition and turned. The key was in my hand the whole time. But when I glanced up, both the front and rear signal lights were glowing. That's impossible. The bike was brand new. I'd only had it for a week. I told myself I was just tired, ignored it, and kept talking. When I finally walked back to the bike, I reached for my helmet, which I had left hanging on the side mirror, but it wasn't there. Confused, I looked around. After several minutes, I spotted it lying deep in the bushes near the field, like someone had tossed it there. My stomach dropped. There was no way it could have ended up that far by itself. I retrieved it, shaken, slipped it on, and left. But the whole ride back, my mind kept spinning. Something was wrong. By the time I got home, it was late. I lived in a 4-room apartment we shared with other workers. My room was down a narrow hall with the kitchen sitting in the middle of the unit. The kitchen door opened directly into the hallway, right where I usually sat to take off my shoes. That night was still. No wind, no draft. I slipped off one shoe. As I bent down to untie the other, I heard a soft creak. The kitchen door slowly swung open on its own. I froze, staring. The kitchen window was shut tight. There was no reason for that door to move. My chest tightened. I yanked off my shoes, rushed to my room, and pulled the blanket over myself. Sleep never really came, but I kept my eyes shut, pretending, until morning.
The next evening, I went back to work like nothing had happened. But I was uneasy. Around 4:30 in the morning, after finishing 5 deliveries, I set out on my 6th. The road I took was a narrow, empty 2-lane stretch through the outskirts of town. Not a soul in sight. That's when I started feeling it again, that presence, the sense that someone was right there with me, watching. I tried to shake it off, even whispered a quick prayer under my breath. Then, out of nowhere, my handlebars jerked hard to the side. The bike spun, and I was thrown across the road. My helmet had been strapped on tight. I wasn't even going that fast, maybe 35, 40 miles per hour. Usually, I ride much faster, but the impact was brutal. I landed face first. My chin split open. By the time I was dragged off the asphalt, I needed 17 stitches. My legs were covered in scrapes and bruises. I blacked out after hitting the ground. The driver had stopped and was pouring water on my face. He told me something that froze my blood. He said, "When I pulled over, you weren't alone. There was a man sitting right next to you on the road." I turned for just a second, and he was gone. But I'd been riding alone. The man helped me into his car and drove me to the hospital, where the doctors stitched me up. It's been 10 days since that night. The bruises are still healing, but what haunts me isn't the accident. It's the feeling that hasn't left. Even now, I swear there's someone near me, just out of sight. That night, on the empty road, someone was riding with me, and I don't think they ever left.
My name is Tom, and what I'm about to tell you happened back in 2005. At the time, my family had just moved into a small house on the edge of a town in Pennsylvania, not far from an abandoned rail yard. Right across the street from our house, about 100 yards away, stood a row of crumbling brick apartments built decades ago for railroad workers. They were nearly a century old, their walls cracked, roofs sagging, windows busted out. No doors anymore, just open gaps in the stone walls where weeds pushed through the floor. Behind the buildings stretched nothing but forest. To the right, an overgrown walking path twisted off into the dark. Nobody used it anymore, especially not after sunset. Don't go near those old quarters at night. That place isn't safe. Of course, we were kids. At 12 years old, warnings only made us more curious. It was summer, and the power was always cutting out that year. During one of those blackouts, my friends and I decided to play hide and seek outside. The rail yard seemed like the perfect place to hide. We swore to each other we'd only stick around the outside, never go in. But rules don't last long in the dark. I remember my buddy Jason ducking through the back window of one of the apartments,
laughing, daring me to follow. Against every instinct, I climbed in after him. The air inside was heavy with mold. Moonlight cut through broken windows, spilling across crumbling walls. That's when I saw it. A dark figure. A woman. Her shadow glided along the far wall, moving from one corner to the other, slow and deliberate. She looked old, bent, her entire shape swallowed in black. Jason and I froze. I couldn't breathe. Then suddenly, flames erupted in the corner of the room. No sound, just fire. We panicked, tried the back window again, but outside we heard footsteps, as if something was waiting for us there. So we turned towards the front. That's when we saw her. The old woman was standing perfectly still by the doorway, her face lit faintly by the fire's glow. Her skin looked burned, smeared with blood. She didn't move, just stared at us. We bolted. I don't remember my feet hitting the ground, just the pounding of my heart as Jason and I stumbled back to the road. By the time we made it to our yard, our legs gave out beneath us. I remember crying, unable to explain what we had seen. That night, I spiked a fever that lasted for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face again. A month passed before anything else happened. Our house sat at the very end of the street, right where the woods began. From our porch, you could see everything on the road, including a massive oak tree, at least 100 years old, looming across from the rail yard. One night, just past midnight, we heard it. Crying. The sound of a woman sobbing under that old oak. It carried across the road so clear we couldn't ignore it. My dad, my uncles, even our neighbors stepped outside to listen. I followed my dad, clinging to his arm. And then we saw it. A black shadow crouched at the base of the tree. The crying grew louder the closer the men walked. But just as they reached out, it vanished. Everyone exhaled at once, muttering, convincing themselves it was gone. But before we could even turn back, the sobbing started again, this time from the next tree down. It kept happening. Night after night, the crying returned, echoing through the street like clockwork. Eventually, my family brought in a preacher from town. He prayed over the place, tied little crosses and scriptures to the trees, and sprinkled holy water along the roadside. After that, the crying grew weaker, less frequent, though it never fully stopped.
The rail yard itself was still dangerous. Everyone knew it. One evening, my aunt's neighbor's daughter, she couldn't have been older than 14, walked home from tutoring, taking the shortcut past the abandoned buildings. She came back, shaken, tears streaking her face. Someone had slapped her. On the side of her neck, a bright red handprint stood out, 5 fingers, clear as day. She swore no one had been there. We all saw the mark. 2 days later, it disappeared, as suddenly as it appeared. After that, the railroad company finally stepped in. They locked up the buildings, welded shut the doors, and eventually tore most of them down.
but the damage was already done. If you think what I saw was terrifying, wait until you hear what happened to my dad. He worked long hours back then and often rode his bike home late at night. Cars were too expensive and motorcycles weren't an option, so it was just him, his bicycle, and empty roads after midnight. One night, around 2:30 in the morning, he was pedaling past the factories when he noticed an elderly woman standing at the side of the road. He slowed down, concerned. "Ma'am, do you need a ride somewhere?" he asked. She nodded. "Just up ahead. Could you take me?" He let her climb onto the back of his bike. But only minutes later, the bicycle grew impossibly heavy, as if it were carrying far more than a frail old woman. Struggling, my dad turned his head. She was gone. No one sat on the bike. But when he looked back down the road, she was standing there again, in the middle of the dark street, staring at him. Her face was the same one I had seen that night in the quarters, burned, smeared with blood. Her feet were twisted at impossible angles, her eyes gleaming red in the dark. "You won't escape me tonight," she said. Dad pedaled as hard as he could. She started after him, stumbling, lurching, but somehow closing the distance with each step. Up ahead, 2 men on a motorcycle appeared. Desperate, Dad waved them down and begged them to ride alongside him until he reached home. They agreed, flanking him until our house came into view. The moment he stumbled through the door, he collapsed with a fever that burned for days. The woman, the witch, the shadow, whatever she was, lingered around that rail yard for years. She terrified cyclists, knocked men from their motorbikes, struck children in the street. Eventually, after repeated prayers, blessings, and demolition of the last rail quarters, her appearances dwindled. Nobody's seen her since, but every time I walk past that old oak tree on the corner, I swear I still hear it. The faint sound of a woman crying in the dark.
My name is Sam, and back in 2011, I lived in a suburb outside of Houston, Texas. About a mile from my neighborhood, there was a brand new hospital that had just opened up. I can't reveal the name, but I worked there in one of the smaller patient care units. When the hospital was still under construction, people in town already whispered about strange things happening there. I didn't believe it, not until I experienced it myself. One night, I was on the overnight shift. If you've ever worked in a hospital, you know most of the staff rotate shifts, and at the time, I was stuck with nights. During my break, I went downstairs to visit a friend of mine who worked the reception desk in another unit. The hospital was only 2 stories. My unit was on the 2nd floor. His was on the 1st. And the 3rd floor was still under construction. The layout of his ward was pretty straightforward. As soon as you entered, the reception desk sat on the right. If you kept walking, you'd find the general ward on the left, then semi-private rooms, and finally, the private rooms. Directly across from those private rooms was the operating theater. But at night, those ORs were usually closed. Not many surgeries happened at that hour. We sat at his desk, joking around to pass the time, when suddenly we heard a sound, like someone calling out in pain. I froze and looked at him. "Maybe a patient's calling," I whispered. He frowned. "I'll go check." He walked down the hall, poking his head into rooms, checking with the few patients and their attendants who were awake. A few minutes later, he came back and shook his head. Nobody called.
We went back to our conversation, trying to brush it off. But then it happened again. This time the voice was sharper, angrier, like someone demanding to be heard. I sat up straighter. "It's coming from the private rooms," I told him. He gave me this uneasy look. By then, he already understood what I hadn't. "That's impossible," he said flatly. "What do you mean?" I asked. "There aren't any patients in the private rooms. They're all locked." I stared at him. "Then what the hell was that?" He avoided my eyes. "Just ignore it." "Why?" I pressed. Finally, with a sigh, he admitted, "Because this happens a lot during my night shifts. Voices. Sometimes like someone's in pain, sometimes like they're angry. I don't pay attention anymore. I just pray under my breath and get on with my work." My skin crawled as he spoke, but he wasn't finished. "There was a nurse who worked here before you," he said. "She complained about hearing the same voices. One night, she wasn't feeling well and had her head down at the desk trying to rest. Out of nowhere, something slapped her. Hard. I felt my stomach drop." "Slapped her?" "Yeah." She looked up instantly, but no one was there. Nothing. In the morning after her shift, we checked the cameras in the ward. The slap was caught on video. You could see her head jerk to the side like she'd been hit, but there was nobody, nothing around her. He leaned back in his chair, his voice low. After that, she never recovered. Physically, she was fine, but mentally, she wasn't the same. She was so terrified she quit soon after. I didn't say a word. The ambience around us was quiet, but not the comfortable kind of quiet. It felt like the air itself was listening. That was my experience. And even though years have passed, every time I think about that hospital, I still hear those voices echoing in my mind.
I hope you're doing well. My name is Ethan Shaw, and I grew up in a small town outside of Springfield, Illinois. For the past 5 months, I've been hooked on horror stories, so I thought I'd share one of my own. Honestly, I've had more than a few strange experiences in my life, but this one still shakes me to my core. It happened a few years ago, during Christmas break, when I went back to visit my grandparents in the countryside. Their farmhouse sits about 30 minutes outside of Springfield, surrounded by endless bare fields and patches of woods. While I was there, I caught up with a few childhood friends I hadn't seen in years. We were feeling nostalgic, restless, and decided to make a night of it. We drove into town, checked into a little roadside motel, and planned to hang out there overnight. The motel was old, the kind that smelled faintly of mildew, with yellowed wallpaper peeling at the corners. The manager handed us the key to a room with 2 double beds. It was winter, bitterly cold, the kind of night where frost clung to the windows and a heavy fog was settling over the town. That night, after laughing and talking for hours, we finally started to drift off to sleep. But not long after I laid down, I heard something strange. From inside the bathroom came the sound of water, like someone was taking a shower, or maybe pouring buckets of water onto the tiles. At first, I figured one of my friends had gotten up to wash up, but the sound went on and on, louder, relentless. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I sat up, patted across the carpet, and pushed open the bathroom door. The second I stepped inside, my stomach dropped. The room was completely empty. No water running, no steam, no sign that anyone had been in there at all. Yet just seconds ago, I could have sworn someone was showering. A chill crawled up my spine. I forced a nervous laugh, told myself I was imagining things, and went back to bed. Sometime later, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember is the feeling of someone standing over me. It was so real, I could almost sense their breath. I tried to open my eyes, but they felt glued shut, like I was paralyzed. Panic surged through me as I struggled, until finally, with every ounce of effort, I managed to force them open. And that's when I saw her. At the foot of my bed stood a woman. She was dressed in a white gown, her skin pale against the shadows of the room. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just smiled at me. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was stretched too wide, too deliberate, filled with something wrong. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of a street lamp outside. I scrambled out of bed and shook my friend awake. "Dude, wake up, look," I whispered frantically, pointing at her. But by the time he sat up, she was gone, vanished. He groaned, annoyed. "Man, stop screwing around, go back to sleep." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe I just imagined it, but my heart wouldn't stop pounding. Sleep was out of the question. I sat upright on the mattress, staring into the darkness, trying to convince myself everything was fine. And then a sound cut through the silence. A laugh. A woman's laugh. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. But it grew louder, sharper, echoing around the room. The sound was coming from the window. I turned, dread pooling in my stomach. And there she was, the same woman, sitting perched on the tree outside our window, her white gown fluttering in the cold night air, her head tilted unnaturally as she looked straight at me, her grin splitting across her face, and she laughed. I froze. Every hair on my body stood on end. This time, I shook my friend harder, dragging him toward the window. "Look, tell me you see that." He looked, and his face went pale. "What the hell?" he whispered. The commotion woke our other two friends. They stumbled over, groggy and irritated, until they saw her too. All of us stood there, pressed against the window, watching this figure cackle from the tree like some unholy predator. We panicked. We grabbed each other and started muttering every prayer we could remember, anything to drive her away. None of us dared open the door. None of us dared move closer to the window. We just stayed huddled together, shivering in the dark, waiting for the night to end. Somehow, by sheer exhaustion or divine mercy, we made it until morning. As soon as the sun rose and light broke through the fog, we grabbed our bags and bolted from that motel. None of us said much during the drive back. We didn't need to. We all knew what we saw. That night still lingers in my memory,
burned into me like a scar. The sound of that woman's laughter, the sight of her pale face against the tree branches. I'll never forget it.
My name is Sean. I grew up in a blue-collar part of town, a quiet Midwestern suburb everyone calls Elmwood. 3 years ago, my family started finishing the upstairs of our house. It had always been a single-family place. My uncle lived in the downstairs portion with his family, and we decided to build out the top so we could finally have our own space. We took our time. The upstairs sat half done for almost a year, empty, quiet, the kind of place that gathers dust and small echoes. We worked on it slowly, patching drywall, running new wiring, putting down flooring. When it was finally livable, my parents, my younger brother, my 2 little sisters, and I moved up. For a couple of weeks, we were thrilled. The bright windows, the view of the neighbors' maples, the freedom of our own rooms. Nothing felt off. Then, 2 or 3 weeks after we settled in, something happened that shredded the easy comfort of those first days. One afternoon, my parents were out. My little brother had gone to a friend's house. It was just me and my 2 younger sisters upstairs. I was scrolling through my phone, and the girls were doing homework at the small table in the open-plan living area. Our kitchen is basically part of the same room. No door, just counters and the sink. One of my sisters went to the bathroom. When she came back, she stopped at the kitchen doorway and stood frozen. She comes from a tiny kid sort of fear. She's always been jumpy. She walked over to me and whispered, "I heard dishes, like someone was moving things in the kitchen." I got up and checked. Empty. I told her she was imagining it, and she went back to her homework, trying to calm herself. A little while later, a different noise started. Heavy footsteps above us, like someone walking with really heavy boots. Not the creak of a house settling, definite paced steps. We all glanced at one another. I said, "Don't panic. Let's go see what's up." My oldest sister grabbed her phone and started recording. I took an old broom handle as a makeshift club and led the way up the short stair to the small hallway and the living room beyond. I was maybe halfway up when, without any warning, a drinking glass, sitting on the coffee table, lifted and smashed against the opposite wall with a force that made the whole house shudder. You have to believe me, it wasn't knocked over. It flew as if thrown by something that isn't human. We bolted down the stairs so fast we left our shoes up there. I only realized when we were already halfway down. My uncle heard us and came out from his part of the house. We told him everything, breathless, hands trembling. He didn't believe us at first. He came up to see, looking around like any reasonable person would. There was nothing. And I'll never forget this, my sister's phone had been recording the whole time. We played the video for him. The glass, the sound, the way the camera shook. He went pale. That's when he finally admitted that something was wrong. When my parents came back later and we showed them the footage, they believed us immediately. I would have shared that video everywhere, with friends, online, but right after that, my phone reset itself and the file vanished. Gone. No corrupted file, no backup, just deleted. I still don't know whether that was chance or something else. For a few days after things calmed down, my parents are the kind of people who pray daily, devout in their own way. and my father sat up one night reading aloud some prayers and passages he knew by heart. It felt like a protection. For a little while, the house was quiet again.
About a month later, I had a normal college day. I came home, ate, prayed like I always do, and crashed in my bedroom for what I thought would be a short nap. I fell asleep in the early afternoon and woke suddenly, disoriented to the feeling that someone or something was near the bedroom door. It was about 7 in the evening. The lights in the house were off, that small, hollow darkness that hangs heavier than daylight. I lay there, staring at the door, and felt eyes on me. The hairs on my arms prickled. There was a presence standing just outside the threshold. I kept my breath steady and started to recite a verse my dad had taught me. Something short, something meant to steady the heart. The more I whispered it, the more the thing seemed to hesitate, and the second it moved past the doorway, I bolted from the room and ran straight downstairs. My parents were still out. I told them when I found them in the driveway, and they tried to reassure me. "It's probably the house," they said. "Old houses make noises." But for 3 nights afterward, I couldn't sleep. My chest would tighten at random hours, and every creak felt like a step. A few days later, my brother and I were up late. It was around 1 in the morning, sitting in my room with the door cracked, listening to spooky stories on his phone. We were trying to spook each other, telling the kinds of urban legends college kids tell to laugh away the dark. Then, out of nowhere, we heard footsteps outside the house. Not upstairs this time, outside, on the porch and the sidewalk. We assumed our parents had come back early, or maybe the neighbor dropping by. I went to the window and checked. Nothing. The lights in the house were off, everything silent and still. We shrugged and went back to our stories to pull the mood back into something lighter. Then, from above, the exact place where we had the apartment finished, came the sound of children playing. Not the muffled echo of kids in a backyard, but the bright, nearly manic clatter of many small feet, laughing and shouting, the kind you'd hear on a schoolyard at recess. It wasn't a piece by a piece, it was a flood of sound, like a group of children had suddenly been let loose in the upstairs rooms. There were no children in our house at night. Not a single child on our block. That was the point when everything stopped feeling like an occasional prank or wind. It was too much, too loud, too deliberate, too close. The sound kept going, and every time I tried to tell myself a rational explanation, my rational voice got drowned out by that impossible, gleeful racket from right over our heads. I lay awake listening, heart pounding, and understood that whatever had taken up space in the rooms above us didn't care about logic or reason. It only wanted to be heard. My name's Sean, and this happened about 5 years ago. At the time, I was a college student, working part-time jobs wherever I could to cover my tuition. One summer, I picked up a job in upstate New York, just outside a little town near the Catskills. There was this old hotel out there, once a fancy place for weekend getaways, that had burned down in an electrical fire. The blaze gutted nearly everything: the furniture, the carpets, the beds. Miraculously, everyone staying there had made it out alive, but the building was left in ruins. By the time I showed up, reconstruction was underway. I wasn't alone. 7 other guys around my age had also been hired to help with cleanup and renovation. The work was rough, but straightforward. We cleared debris, hauled wood, and got a few of the guest rooms almost ready for repainting. That first night, they put all 8 of us in one of the larger rooms to sleep. It was bare bones, just cots and sleeping bags scattered across the floor. But there was enough space. We were exhausted, so crashing out together didn't seem like a big deal. But in the middle of the night, I woke to the strangest sensation. Something was tugging at my feet. I jerked awake, heart racing, but when I sat up, there was nothing there. Just shadows stretching across the unfinished walls. I told myself one of the guys was messing with me and tried to shake it off. But just as I was drifting back to sleep, another guy suddenly screamed, "Cut it out! Who the hell's pulling my feet?" We all sat up at once. Nobody confessed because none of us had done anything. That's when the room went ice cold with fear. I pulled out my phone and called the hotel manager. I told him something weird was happening in the room, that we felt like someone or something was messing with us. His reply was flat and tired. "It's late. Just go to sleep. Tomorrow we'll move you to another room." We had no choice but to tough it out. We pulled our blankets tight, covering our heads and tucking the edges under our feet, trying to keep whatever it was from grabbing us again. But then the impossible happened. Our cots began to shake. One after another, they lifted off the ground as though unseen hands were trying to flip us over. The whole room was alive with movement, rattling, and heavy thuds. We panicked. Some of the guys started praying under their breaths. And then, just like that, it stopped. Silence fell heavy over the room. Somehow, we made it until morning. When daylight finally broke, we demanded a new room. The second night, things seemed calmer. The new room was smaller but quieter, and we convinced ourselves it had just been our imagination, or maybe nerves. By midnight, everyone was asleep. But around 1 a.m., though, one of the guys got up to use the bathroom. Because the place was still under construction, the bathrooms weren't inside the rooms yet. You had to go out into the hallway. We didn't think much of it until a few minutes later, we heard it. A scream. High-pitched, desperate. "Help me! Help me!" We all bolted upright, staring at each other in confusion. Then we ran into the hall. Our friend was lying unconscious on the floor. His face was pale, his body limp. We shook him until he came around, and when he finally opened his eyes, he was trembling. Through stammering breaths, he told us what had happened. He was walking to the bathroom, and there was this dark figure standing right in front of me. I screamed, and it grabbed me. It yanked me by my ankles, dragged me across the floor. I couldn't fight it. Everything went black after that. We were frozen in terror. That was the breaking point. None of us wanted to stay a second longer. By sunrise, we'd packed up and demanded our pay from the owner. We left that cursed place behind and swore never to return. A few days later, still shaken, we talked to some locals about the hotel. That's when we learned the truth. When the fire had broken out months before, not everyone had escaped after all. A young woman, just 26 years old, had been trapped in one of the guest rooms. The flames consumed everything before help could reach her. People in town whispered that her spirit never left, that she was still inside those walls, angry, restless, pulling at anyone who dared to disturb her. I can tell you with absolute certainty, those whispers are true. What we experienced in that hotel wasn't a prank or exhaustion or our imagination. Something was there, something that wanted us gone. And we listened, because after those nights, none of us ever set foot in that hotel again.
My friends, I hope tonight's stories left you haunted, lingering in the shadows, even after the screen goes dark. If they did, don't forget to show your support. Your likes truly help me. They show your appreciation, and they motivate me to keep working harder to bring you even darker, scarier stories. Your subscription isn't just a click, it's your welcome into the Spooky Stories family. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next nightmare. Before you go, if you haven't heard the last 2 stories I shared, make sure you do. They're waiting for you in the dark corners of this channel. Until next time, keep your doors locked, your lights low, and your eyes open. Sleep tight if you can.